no, there's not time because we're relying on the weather. It's going to rain. I've got to finish this before I can do that. So I go on vacations with my kids and my parents by ourselves most of the time. And that's where that conflict can kind of fester.
Well, you got to make hay when the sun shines. So, Elaine, I have a question for you. Is this a farmer problem or is this a sociology problem?
Ladies and gentlemen, farmers, ranchers, and distinguished guests, thank you for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast, where we discuss the latest ideas, methods, trends, and techniques available to help your farm achieve higher levels of farm profitability. The Farm for Profit podcast is co-hosted by Tanner Winterhoff, the Iowa Bankerman, and David Whitaker, the Iowa Land Guy, where in tandem they will share their ideas and advice from industry experts. Thank you again for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast. Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And now, here's Tanner and David.
Listeners, welcome to the Farm for Profit podcast. This is Tanner Winterhoff, and shortly to be joined by David Whitaker. We've got a great conversation in store with you today. Remember to like, rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. If you've got ideas for shows or people to have on as guests, send those to farm4profitllc@gmail.com or shoot us a text or voicemail 515-207-9640. Today, the listener review that you guys leave behind is brought to you by Gierenhoff. They're head of the class, no matter the crop, and an extremely proud partner of the Farm for Profit podcast. So give them a check at Gierenhoff.com. A text that came in from 819-647. Jonathan from Quebec, been listening for over a year now. Love your podcast. There's always something I can learn to help improve my family's operation. And I think today, Jonathan, this will be another one of those episodes that we can help your farm improve something. And hopefully it's communication as we talk in-law factors. So Dave, why don't you introduce who we have as a guest today?
All right, so listeners, we are here with Elaine. If you remember Elaine from a previous episode, she is Canada's farm whisperer. She helped us that go-to expert for farm families who want better communication. Tanner, we did an episode just a while ago on that, I think a two-part, and it was well received. We had some good comments on that. She's a professional speaker and takes her passion to share simple, practical, and just tools, just normal tools to help families do better on the farm. And we have a second guest today.
Yeah, that's the exciting part. So listeners, thank you so much for suggesting we get Elaine back on here. And then a even bigger thanks to Elaine for introducing us to Lauren Lundt. So she is known as the Iowa farmer's wife. So partial, already a big fan of her because she's from Iowa. So welcome, Lauren. Lauren has been working on her passion project to put together an event to help farming families get professional help when it comes to family conflicts, communication barriers, and more. And I would say the and more today is specifically related to how do we deal with our in-laws? How do we successfully work in and around the family we didn't necessarily choose?
And you married into farming.
I married into farming.
I did as well.
Grew up on my own farm, so spent the first 20-some years of my life farming one particular way. And now I participate on a farm where they don't do things the same way that I did as a kid.
Maybe I need a tagline instead of the Iowa farmer's wife, the Iowa cattle woman's husband, because my wife's she's the cattle behind the hat, is what I always tell people.
Yes. So Lauren, why don't you do a better job of introducing yourself than I did? Tell us a little bit about your story and how you became an in-law.
Okay. Well, so I met my husband when he was still active in Marine Corps. He's in the reserves right now. I come from Central Florida, born and raised. I went to college in around Naples in Florida. And we dated while he was still active, and he had grown up in Iowa. And he was very nervous when we started dating that I wasn't going to be interested in moving to Iowa from Florida. And I mean, we hit it off, and I came up here with him. We got married. We're on kid number 3. So I came into this completely knowing nothing about farming. I knew strawberry farming. I was near Plant City, Florida. That's what I grew up knowing. So I came up here and quickly found out it's not green tractors and red barns. It's a lot harder than you see on the outside. So yeah, we've been up here for 7 years. We live a half a mile away from his parents. He farms with his dad, who is a third generation farmer up in this area. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Lauren, I have a question for you. Just for reference, what's your husband's name?
Matthew Lundt.
Matthew. Okay, gotcha. And then, when you met your husband, he's in the military, Semper Fi, go Marines, and you came up here from Florida, or came from Florida to Iowa. Does he have other siblings? We're talking about in-laws, and we're going to get to relationships, Tanner. So I assume, I'm just making the assumption that there's other siblings in this mix.
Yeah, so he's one of 4 children. He's got an older sister and an older brother and a younger brother. None of them were interested in going into farming. 2 of them are really big into sports. One's a coach for a football team. One's currently getting his doctorate, and then one is a statistician at the Mayo Clinic.
Gotcha.
So they went very different ways than him.
Absolutely. So Elaine, how did you get connected to Lauren?
Well, the beautiful thing about social media and spreading the message in various ways is Lauren reached out to me back in the winter time about what she was seeing on the social media, farm wife, women in agriculture, different Facebook groups. And she's just really tired of the rant against in-laws. And she said, I've looked at your things, Elaine. I know you've written the book, Farming's In-Law Factor. So I think we need to do something about this and stop listening to all the angst and all the conflict without having anybody stepping forward to create solutions. So what we did is we created a webinar that we had on June the 11th. We had 90 women and men in the waiting list, and we had about 25 people actually come on the paid webinar. And now that is an actual product in my store on my website at Farm Family Coach that Lauren and I created. And we're here today because you have listeners who still want answers about Farming's In-Law Factor, and you can ask Lauren, but I think the ranting is still continuing because people don't know about the book, people don't know about the webinar, and people don't know that they have choices.
Mm-hmm. So Elaine, help me understand, because I'm coming in somewhat blind, because I haven't heard anybody rant. I'm on social media. My wife farms. We did gender equity, first-time farmer deal. Maybe I'm just secluded with a rock, but I am on about every social media profile. Who's complaining? First off,
I'll let Lauren answer that.
know.
Yeah, I'll let Lauren tell you. She had 5 very succinct points for me when we started planning the webinar. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, so I guess the best way to go about it is I joined these farmers' wives support groups on Facebook.
Okay.
So it's not this general, my friends are out there on Facebook really upset kind of coming out there, because I don't really have a stable base of friends in this area because I'm not from here. So I reached out to these groups of women that are in the 5,000-6,000s, trying to, at first, it's all about recipes and farm meals that you can take to your husband out in the field. That kind of is what brought me in, and what got me to stay is there's women in my position who move from outside this farming realm, get into this lifestyle with a completely different family, a completely different lifestyle, way of handling things, way of talking to each other, way of generating money and running a business, and trying to learn that while still starting a family and still having a healthy relationship with your partner. So it's a very isolated group, but between the 3 groups I'm a part of, it's about 15,000 women that are they're voicing their frustration because they don't know how to communicate with their partners. And in a world that some of them did grow up in it, some of them didn't, but you come in to play with your in-laws and they handle things differently, sometimes better, sometimes worse, sometimes the same, but they don't have the tools to figure out how to effectively communicate that, especially during your busy season.
And I would say, Dave, that she did very accurately describe, these are in groups. Mm-hmm. These are in closed groups. This isn't a blast out to however many thousands of followers a person has, that could almost make your in-laws more mad because they may see it. And it's kind of the way the conversations go in real life is they aren't had out in the open. The issues are being discussed in private.
Well, and Tanner, if her husband is anything like my dad as a Marine, you don't ask why. You just say, jump, how high, Dad? And there was no questioning why we do it this way or anything there. I'm guessing you maybe got a little pushback from the Marine side of the world there too.
I mean, I'm very fortunate with my husband. He's very level-headed. I think the biggest challenge that he has is trying to do too many different things and find his own way in farming that's different than his dad's in some ways. That's different than the neighbor down the road. Because we also have cattle. He also is still in the reserves. He's also trying to spend time with us. So he's wearing 8, 9 different hats, trying to succeed at all of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So,
And the other thing, Dave, is it's not just wives. Because we've had some very successful female farmers on our podcast that have spouses that I'm not going to argue on their behalf. I'm going to make a general assumption that, could you imagine being the husband to the farm wife on her family farm and what type of potential conflicts you run into on that side? So let's start off here and get really basic for maybe those that don't necessarily understand what we're talking about. So Elaine, who are in-laws? What could make up your group of in-laws?
So you've mentioned a very key factor because I think in Iowa, 26% of the farm operators are women. And so their spouses are son-in-laws. And the issue in farming's in-law factor with son-in-laws is they'll say, Elaine, I left a good trade job to come back to the farm to be in business with my wife. And when do I go from being an employee to an actual shareholder? So the in-laws are the people who've come into the farm family business or have not come into the business, David and Tanner, because they're married to the successor, but they may or may not have a voice and they may or may not have ownership. And so the book that we wrote, Farming's In-Law Factor, addressed the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the son-in-law, and the daughter-in-law. And then I got a complaint from someone and said, well, you haven't written about Matthew, i.e. Lauren's husband. What about the son? And the son is between a rock and a hard place because he wants to stay married because divorce is not the option he wants, but he also is trying to please what the parents' expectations are. So we didn't write an actual chapter on being the son in a farm, but the whole idea of the book is how to create more harmony and less conflict on family farms. And I wrote the book in 2014 with Dr. Megan McKenzie, who moved to my town, who just happened to have a PhD in conflict resolution, who just happened to have grown up on a farm that was very fragmented, and who just happened to have never published her thesis from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. I said, well, I can help you publish. So the book is highly annotated with a complete bibliography. We spent a year writing it, and we interviewed a lot of very unhappy in-laws, and also discovered, maybe David, the reason you haven't seen much about it in social media that you circulate in is because when we did the research, there's almost nothing written to help.
Interesting. And that's why we're doing this episode today and why we're thankful that both of you have joined us. But what we've been criticized about, Dave, is sometimes we talk around ideas, solutions, or talk around ideas and the latest in options, and we don't necessarily give people the solutions on this podcast. So that's one thing we're going to focus on today, ladies, is we've identified the problem. We know that it's not every farm has an issue with every in-law. This will be a good test for me to see if my in-laws actually listen to the podcast, because I would say for the most part, we get along great. We just got back from a trip, spending a week together, and nobody died. We didn't kill each other. Things were okay, but there's also quirks of, I don't know why he does it this way. So what are some common quirks that in-laws run into that might be different in the farming community than I don't want to say regular.
You're saying quirks. I'm going to say unwritten rules.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. What are some unwritten rules that might be different than if someone's marrying into a family that is just bankers and insurance people?
Well, I'll take a stab at that first, and then let Lauren tell you about haying season. So one of the unwritten rules is it's always the farm first, and we don't play until all the work is done. Well, that's an impossible expectation, because we all know that that's a polarity, and Barry Johnson calls a polarity a thing that needs to be managed but never goes away. And so we need to work, but we also need to play. So Tanner, good on you for going on holidays with your in-laws. That's fabulous. You got some time away. So, but in some farms, the unwritten rule is we always work. The one that causes conflict with in-laws and these rants that Lauren's talking about on social media is the unwritten rule is that we keep the women out of business. And this is 2022. And David, your wife would just hit the sky, being told that she can't be an entrepreneur or take out her own loans and things like that. And so that's another unwritten rule. And I came across it just this week, where I had a 40-year-old young farmer call me. He says, Elaine, my parents own the farm, 7,500 acre farm, 50-50. I have two brothers. My wife, all the women, all the spouses have off-farm jobs. And I said, are all the women shareholders? And he said, oh, no. And I go, well, now we have a lot to talk about. Though, and then another unwritten rule is actually how we do conflict, Tanner, because having interviewed me and podcasted me before, is I believe conflict resolution makes you unstoppable, and it's a business risk management strategy, and it's going to make you more money because you aren't going to be distracted with drama and emotion on your farm, because you're going to solve things. Just like you said, you're going to create solutions. And so, there's a whole pile of in-laws causing drama because they're making assumptions and they aren't coming to the table to address expectations or sorting out what needs and wants and how everybody has a voice. So I'll let Lauren share what she's seen, because she came into this very much clean and clear.
Well, so I was very blessed to come into a family unit that is very transparent with me on the farm. So they've come and heard of other farms in the area or other generations in the past that did keep women out of the picture when it came to business decisions, financing. It would be very easy for me to just stay on the outside. I have my own marketing job. I have a marketing background. I could just kind of stay with my off the farm job and not really get involved. But I've heard my in-laws voice several times that they know and they respect the decisions that come from their spouses. And like you guys said, it's women in ag too. So it's listening to your husband, it's listening to your wife, and knowing that you're a unit, you're a partnership, and making those decisions together. But I have seen, like in these support groups, where it's very easy to just kind of brush the person who's come into this to the side and say, you don't know how it's done. I don't have the time to teach you. Here's how we're doing it, and that's how it's going to stay. And all the yelling and stomping and everything can't change it sometimes.
Yeah. So Elaine teased us about a haying season story. What was that little tease for?
Well, so it's summertime. So we have alfalfa, we've got oats on the ground, and when it comes to summertime in Iowa, it's very different than it was for me in Florida. I grew up where we had a boat. We went to the beach. Every year we went to the mountains. We took all these vacations. But my parents also, they were a construction worker and they were an interior designer. So they had those kind of 9-to-5 jobs where they can take that block of time off. I came into a situation where I honestly was told, the farm does kind of come first in a lot of situations. There weren't a lot of vacations for them. But there was also 4 kids and they were working their ass off. So it was, they didn't have a lot of time for that. So we've really struggled with finding a balance between the way I grew up and the way that he grew up, where no, there's not time because we're relying on the weather. It's going to rain. I've got to finish this before I can do that. So I go on vacations with my kids and my parents by ourselves most of the time. And that's where that conflict can kind of fester.
Well, you got to make hay when the sun shines. So, Elaine, I have a question for you. Is this a farmer problem, or is this a sociology problem? And the reason I ask that is because the social norms that I have, the belief system that I have, came from my parents. And so I saw my dad be the breadwinner, be the person who's in charge. And he always asked mom's opinion, but dad would make the final decision, period. So the way I grew up was that the male is not, I don't even want to use the word dominant, but was the one who was the decision maker and decided which way to go with money, which way to go with business, which way to go with that. Now, I'll argue that as I've grown older, that has changed, got married, have my own wife, and make her
my
own
wife
decisions.
makes all of our decisions.
Correct. Did she grow up that way, parents-wise? My wife, her parents grew up same way. Her dad was the decision maker, so she was okay with that. Do we just have two different social norms that are clashing, Florida and Iowa?
Let's use the word culture. Culture beats strategy. I do a whole speech on this at workshops. Culture is the glue that holds the farm family together. And culture consists of three things, Dave. What you believe to be true, how you behave towards each other, and the one you just highlighted is how you make decisions. So I want every listener to stop what they're doing and write down these three words because they're life-changing. What do you and your partner believe to be true? Do you believe equal respect? Do you believe equal opportunity for regardless of what gender you are? Number two is how do you behave towards each other? And do you accept bad behavior? And do you stop bad behavior in its tracks? And do you reach out to attack the issue without attacking the person? And the third thing is decision making. So on our farm, my husband and my son, who's our successor, they make all kinds of decisions. But if we're going to spend, 6 figures or more on a new piece of equipment, I want to know what's going on and be kept in the loop because I'm not involved in the everyday activities of the farm. But I actually am the president of Froese Family Farms. Uh-huh. And my husband is the president of Boys of Eden Select Seeds, which has now been sold to Inc. Ventures, which is my son and his wife. And so what you're asking, Dave, is you saw your parents making decisions or your father having the ultimate decision. And that's something that needs to be addressed in conversations. Are you happy with how we make decisions on this farm or how we make decisions in this family? And I grew up with a very Irish, strong-willed mother and a very compliant father, but who both of them worked really, really hard. And I just, when I came across this whole thing around culture, it's when you can nail it down and say, are you happy with how decisions are being made on the farm? And I mean, look at Lauren. She's about to have her third child. She's married to Matthew. She has her own graphic design marketing business. But did you hear her say, I don't have a lot of friends where I live in Iowa because I didn't grow up here? Well, that's the problem. That's the sociology issue around how farm men and women have an emotional support group beyond their own farm family so that they can take their filters off and say, is it normal to work 100-hour weeks all the time? Is it normal not to go on vacation ever with your husband who you fell in love with 7 years ago and really want to stay married to? And I always tell people normal is only a setting on your dishwasher. So I'll stop
I like
there.
That.
But
I like that.
She's stopping because she saw both Dave and I throw our hands up in the air because, yes, I'm not a farmer today. I'm a banker. But I grew up with those same farm characteristics of I will look for something to do when I don't have something to do because I work the 100 hours a week, whether it is at the bank, on the podcast, or with one of the family operations. And yes, this is a rare trip where we all just went on vacation together, but we had to force ourselves to go 8 hours away from the farm. So you weren't tempted to, a storm blew up. We need to go back and take care of things. No, that's a full day trip. We're not going to do that.
See, and I grew up with parents that worked not farming. And so I didn't grow up farming, but my wife grew up with cattle as a century farm. And so now we have cattle, and every time I want to take a vacation and go to Cancun and get her in a bikini, I can't do it. She's like, well, who's going to do chores? Well, who's going to do this?
Right.
It's like, come on. So it's kind of you marry into that lifestyle.
Yeah.
I told myself, well, I guess I got to accept it. So I've struggled to find. I try to find more babysitters all the time so that we don't have to. And
You've already got the solution.
Well, I'm
You're
trying
working
to find
on the solution for
But
it.
I have the same problem. I want to go boating and do everything else, but we got chores
But
to do.
my question for you, Dave, is where is it written that you can't train Tanner to do chores or somebody else in the neighbor who also loves cattle, and that you barter for time like we did in the old economy? I help you as a neighbor, you help me.
Right.
And I bartered for time for childcare with my son. Every Tuesday, I had Tuesday to myself. Lauren, what would it look like if you had a whole day to yourself, away from your children to do what you needed to do? That's part of this ranting, is these women are exhausted. And it doesn't matter, no matter what they try to do, nothing ever seems to change because their voice is not respected and not heard.
Right. So
Just for statistical purposes, I Googled what percentage of agriculture women in Iowa. So just Iowa. It says nearly 35,000 women are making key decisions on Iowa farms of the 86,000 farms every day, according to USDA 2017 census. And for the 2021 academic year, 57.1% of all undergraduates at Iowa State University are women. So we have a more than majority of women that are in agriculture and 30% that are making decisions, just for statistical facts. Now go
good.
ahead.
Yeah, that's good. Good for us to have for perspective. We had Andy Cajun Junkin on to do kind of a second part of making your legacy farm. So his was a simple start to a business plan, was kind of the theme around his episode, and that was putting a business plan together. And he stated that you had to get the whole family around to understand what the core goal was for your farm. What was going to be what you were going to drive forward. The one story he said is that the farm wanted to keep its cost of production for a bushel of corn under $4. And they could continuously come back to that one goal and say, all right, is this going to help us save money or keep our production under $4 a bushel corn? So, Lauren, what's your advice to the listeners to help uncover, as an in-law, what the wants and the needs are for the farm so that we actually can understand where the farm's going? As my coined phrase is, I'm the outlaw.
Well, so as far as profitable, the business aspect of our farm, the biggest help to me was to sit down with my husband every year with our financial advisor. We have the same financial advisor that we've had for the last 5 years, and I've been brought into that situation. We have a lot of outside businesses that we're both joint working with, and we can sit down with this one man or woman, and we can look at the numbers. Here's our expenses. Here's what we're bringing in. And at the very end of that sheet, it's a number. And our financial advisor says, this is the number I like you guys to stay with. And every year we've seen whether that's gone up, whether that's gone down, and we can make those decisions together on, can we buy this new piece of equipment? Can we get more cattle? And really talk about realistically what it looks like if things get better or if things get a lot worse. That was the biggest eye-opening thing to me, because I came into this and I'm seeing 6 figures for a tractor. And I'm like, there's no way that we're getting a new tractor. Like, how is anyone affording this without, I mean, you can't work any more hours in a day. You can't work any more days in a week. So how do you make more with the same amount of time? So is that me working more off the farm? Is that us trying to find a niche with our cattle? Is it, I mean, we've switched to more hay. And I mean, I've got I'm biased, but I have a very smart husband that's trying to constantly make those changes and talking to me about it too. But it's hard work. I mean, he works 4 jobs, like full-time jobs. And it's trying to find balance with him working with that while also making sure our relationship is solid. Because what I have noticed is when we're not solid financially, we're suffering, because he can work like crazy, but that's when mistakes happen. That's when we're not communicating. That's when things start going downhill really quickly.
So I picked 2 things out of that real quick. That you guys communicate and your husband brought you in on what the needs were to the farm. You weren't left out. And I assume, Elaine, that's going to be the direction you're going to suggest our listeners to go. Is it's got to start with the spouse first. And you've got to be on the same page.
Just really quickly, he got that from his father, because his father is very adamant about bringing his mom into the conversation too. So just wanted to.
Well, that's great.
So it sounds like you have good communication. I was just thinking the memes. Have you seen all the cattle memes about working cattle together as husband and wife? Like, if you want to stay married, if you can work cattle together and swear at each other, you are going to stay married.
We don't work cattle together. We did once, and it was bad.
And it was bad, right? Yep, same here. I was like, we're going this direction. She's like, that's not the way we do it. We're going this direction. This is how you do it. You didn't grow up with it. So it sounds, I hear that you sound like you have good relationship as being an in-law. Help me understand. Were the groups complaining about it and you were with them complaining about it? Or you're saying, why are they all complaining?
We did not always have this communication. It can always be built upon, for sure. I don't want to come in here sounding like we're the ideal and this is how we do it and this is how you guys need to do it. There's a lot of underneath the surface stuff going on with in-laws and family and our relationship, and we've worked very hard to try to communicate well. That doesn't mean that it's always been this smooth, and we've looked at both of our parents for things we want to continue and things that we want to extinguish.
So we're trying to bring more education to the other women.
It's a learning.
And men.
And men. We're trying to bring, for the people in the group or any groups out there, both of you are trying to bring more education and light to how we do that better, to do what you're saying has helped you.
So, Elaine, to your part of that question, we know what it is that we need to get to, but what's your advice for our listeners to get from maybe there isn't communication and isn't inclusion right now?
There you go.
How do we get there?
So I have a saying, you do not have because you do not ask. And I think that's also biblical from James. But, you do not have because you do not ask. And how can you ask in a respectful, kind, gracious way for what you're needing and what you're wanting? And I think another way of framing it is when I was trained in conflict resolution, we had this phrase, I think, I need, I feel, I want. I think it's time that our family gets together for coffee to talk about expectations. I feel that there's a lot of eggshells that we're walking on, and that's a term that many farm families use. Elaine, it feels like we're all walking on eggshells on this farm. I need to understand how to communicate better and resolve tension with you because I don't like how this feels. And I want us to get along, but I also want to understand what is it you need that you're not getting. And as I was preparing for today, Tanner, you know that I did the podcast with Jason Meadows back in the spring, and he was asking, Elaine, how do we come to the table on these hard issues? And I said, you sit down and you write a letter. You can do it in a Word document, but if it's handwritten, it's even better. And get your thoughts and feelings on paper and say, I want to be a daughter-in-law that you respect, but I'm confused. Everything that I've tried to come to the table hasn't worked. And I think, in one of the points that Lauren was preparing for our webinar, one of the things that was shown is that all the money and resources go to the farm. None is allocated for personal growth, such as home renovations or vacations. Well, what Lauren and Matthew did because of their father's coaching was financial transparency. The numbers don't lie. The numbers are the numbers. So start with concrete things that don't have feelings, but are true. How much did you spend as a family on family living last year? $80,000. Okay, that might be the real number, but if you spent 40 grand, you're not happy because you're crying at the grocery store wondering if you have money for diapers because it's not enough. And so as a daughter-in-law, you might think, well, I'm just going to have to suffer through this. But I come from a worldview where husband and wife are one. They're one unit. And so it's up to both spouses to make sure that the other spouse is getting what they're needing. And if they're not, then they come as a team to the family, to the founding couple and say, Mom and Dad, we have a few things we need to talk about because we've got a huge disconnect here of expectation. Oh, and by the way, we're really struggling. And I have a family right now in Missouri that I'm coaching where they are struggling even with the other extra job. And the parents just say, well, you have to pull up your belt. You have to work harder. And that's not the answer, Tanner. This is 2022. It costs $84,000 to raise a family on a farm if you have children. And if you're not getting the right amount of income, then there's financial conflict. So start with that. Oh, I just also written a blog called Assumption-Free Farming. What are you assuming about your founding parents? What are you assuming about your in-laws that may or may not be true? And so with my daughter-in-law, when I sense that there's tension, my first question is, are you getting enough sleep? Because she's raising 3 children under 5 and is often very tired. Secondly, how can I help? And what would you like me to do differently? And then she tells me, and isn't that interesting? I'm not guessing. And then I have a problem because I actually wrote the book. So you can imagine what it feels like to be me as a mother-in-law. If I'm not doing my own walk the talk, then that's not integrity either, right?
Yeah.
There's a very helpful question for each generation. What's working for you? What isn't? And what would you like me? Because then you take personal responsibility for your behavior and your actions and your communication. And you say, what would you like me to do differently?
So I got to interject with my thoughts here. I heard 3 words and I almost spaced off. The 3 words were I feel, I want, I need. And I immediately went to you entitled son of a buck. And so if my kid said that to me, if I said that to my father-in-law, I feel, I want, I need to inherit your farmland and I'm going to take over. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And if I'd say it that way, I would be crucified in my father-in-law's relationship. I think I know what's best for my family. And so when I thought, oh, hey, we should inherit your dad's ground. We should try and procure your dad's ground because maybe we could do the operation different. Being that in-law, I don't feel it's my place to say that. Now, I could give advice to my wife and say, hey, I think we should have a conversation with your dad, but it won't come well received from me. Maybe you should ask your dad if we can buy his back 40 and we'll start that generational transitioning. But there's probably another book that needs to be written called The Generational Gap in Farming. And I feel that a lot of young people, younger than me, anybody under 40, has a little bit more entitlement than I think I felt. Maybe that's just me getting old. But I would never think any of that. This isn't my ground. That's my father-in-law's farm. It's not my farm. Look, I got to go make my own money. I got to make my own money, do my own thing. So if my kid ever came up to me and said any of that, it would be, you're out of the will. I tell you what, I'll keep it and you're done.
But Dave, you're jumping ahead of yourself because we weren't asking for ground. We were just asking for a conversation. So it's baby steps.
Yeah.
The first step in transition is getting to the table to talk. So the first need is need for conversation, need for clarity of expectation, need for timelines. You're not going to ask for buying ground right out of the gate. But I also agree with what you just said about entitlement and greed. The younger generation of farmers has never, or in rare places, has had the same kind of sacrificial suffering experiences as the founders have. And I think we talked about when we talked to the Hayes family and when I talked to you before about succession, there's also a huge need for doing what Lauren and Matthew are doing. Every farm family that's listening to this podcast needs a financial planner, because when you don't have enough money to live and you don't have a plan ahead of you for you and your wife and your cattle for where that income is going to come from as you age and as your parents-in-law age, everybody's tangled and muddled because it's not clear that their basic needs are taken care of.
Yeah, that entitlement, Dave, comes from the joke of, I found my wife in a plat book.
Yeah.
That's the entitlement side of it. And not every person has that. It's just a common joke because it's assumed rather than actually factual.
And let's take it on a smaller scale, not to my scale where I sell farmland, that's my gig. So I thought, well, farmland, how do we eventually invest for the future? Let's take Lauren's example. I feel, I want, I need a vacation.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. If we come in and say it that way, it's like, well, I've been working my butt off. She said her husband works 4 jobs and does that. I was told, Tanner, when I got married, there's 2 things that'll break your marriage up. It's sex and money. Well, if we consider our relationship with our in-laws like a marriage, well, it's probably not sex, but it's probably money. So if it's money that's going to break it up, it's having those hard conversations about money. And I think Elaine hit it. All I'm asking for is a conversation. I'm not making enough money. I need a little bit more. A need word there, or I want to take a vacation, but the time is not there, or, et cetera, et cetera. I think conversation goes anywhere.
Yeah. So we had a listener question that I had highlighted for today's show, and I think we just tipped the beginning portions of the answer. So the question is, what can I do as an in-law to help navigate my family, meaning the in-laws, into starting transition planning conversations when you know there haven't been any, even if you have a feeling you won't be involved in them, you just know they need to happen. So Lauren, why don't you start off, because it sounds like your in-laws have brought you into the loop. So was this initiated by them or a conversation that you initiated?
100% them. Before we even got engaged, before we even got married, that was clear to me how transparent that they wanted to be with their son and with the rest of their children on what was going to happen or what is going to happen when they get to that stage. The way that they run their farm right now, if Matthew was going to come back and farm with his father, what that would look like. And then whenever something does happen to both of them, how things were going to play out. They wanted everybody to know it, myself included, because I was taking steps to be involved in this family. And they've seen the reasoning for that is they've seen around them, they've heard other families where the complete farm is just gone because that conversation's not had. You've got siblings fighting over money. You've got siblings fighting over land. Some want to farm, some don't want to farm. Just horror stories around us. So they started from a place very, very early on where they said, this is what we want to do and how we want to do it. And this is how it's going to get passed on to our children. It had to look very different for Matthew than it did for the rest of the siblings.
Right.
So they had that very open conversation with all of their kids.
So that's almost a dream come true, Elaine. But for this listener who doesn't think there's a plan even in place, what suggestions do you have to them to get the conversation rolling without feeling like they're being pushy or entitled? I mean, maybe those are going to come across, but what's your advice?
So in conflict conversation, we have this thing about intent, action, effect. So the first thing is to come very clearly across. It's not my intent to be entitled or to be asking for things that aren't mine or aren't what you feel should be coming my way. My intent is just to start having a conversation to open up possibility and to create solutions for this family. The other thing with this, I assume she's an in-law, and I'm assuming it's a woman. It could be a son-in-law, but it's what David said too before about you're married as a couple, and what Lauren said, she and Matthew act and decide as one. And so as a couple, you can make your approach and say, when would it be a convenient time to have a conversation about what the future of this farm looks like? Because as I approach 40, I'm just curious, Dad, when am I going to be given an opportunity to start building equity? And the other thing is, if you are afraid, Mom and Dad, of this conversation being disrespectful or highly conflictual, why don't we hire a facilitator to help us have these hard conversations? Because there are farm families, Tanner, who just don't know how to have good conversations without going straight to emotion, yelling, screaming, throwing pieces of paper on the floor and swearing and saying, no, this is not the way it's going to happen. And for some people, that in itself is a crystallizing moment to understand that this isn't going to happen and that they need to make other plans for their future because the parents do not want to make a plan. And so how long do you wait?
Tanner, we're going to write a book. It's going to be called How to Ask the Question. And I don't mean pop the question, but how to start the conversation.
You might sell extra books because people think it's about how to
and it'll be all about farming. That's what it'll be. We've talked about this. So, listeners, we've emulated you that you needed an answer, and here's the answer. Communication is key. Now, Tanner, I want to dig deeper, and I want to know what are the most common issues when it comes to in-laws. And I think we have a good expert on the line here with Lauren. Lauren, what are the if you can disclose, you're giving a little bit of your laundry, but what are issues that you had with your in-laws, or you have with your in-laws? And Tanner, both of us would have issues too. So,
well, I guess the best way for me to answer by still standing on that fence with one way or another to go is just doing things differently, and knowing that no matter how much conversation I have, they've done things differently than I would do them. Their relationship is different than my relationship with Matthew. And knowing that that's all right, and there's nothing that we need to fight about because that's different. It's we say communication is key, and like talking about things is key. Well, a lot of times with your in-laws or with an older generation in general, they may not want to talk to you. You may try to open that conversation, and they're not talkers. They don't want to open up about those sort of things, or when they open up, it's not always in a constructive way. So I think where I found a balance is talking to the person I know that I can talk to, my husband, and opening up about what I feel, but knowing at the end of that conversation, it may not be solved. We have several conversations where nothing is solved, but the words are out there. The problem is out there. The frustration is out there, and we know we need to work towards something. And looking at my parents too. I mean, he obviously has in-laws. My parents come up here from Florida and stay with us all summer. They do things very different than his parents did. So he's having to learn that balance too, and know that, okay, well, this is how our parents did it. We're not going to do it that way in these aspects, and we're going to do it that way in these aspects. And finding common ground in that, I guess, not knowing that we can't always have these conversations with them and have a resolution, but Matthew and I can have a conversation and find some resolution outside them.
Well, appreciate that, Lauren. I think you have more friends than you even know. And they are all Iowa State graduates that are like Corey, our other podcast host, that they come home and they learned all this great education. They got new ideas, and they try to tell the family farm, oh, we should do this. We should switch to this. And they get met with a roadblock. So it's not just, I'm going to say, in-laws. I'm going to say that's a problem with everybody. So, Tanner, what I heard, what I've heard so far is some things that we're talking with in-laws is transitions. That's mine. Old habits or old ways of doing things, and maybe not open to talking about a new way to do something. And then money, of course, and how do we live? Elaine brought up, and $84,000 per couple. What do you got? What are other things that in-laws are going to be wondering about?
Well, the other one that was been brought up is relationships, just the way different relationships are handled. I communicate with my parents on a much different schedule than my wife communicates with her parents. I communicate with my siblings in a completely different fashion than she communicates with her siblings, and vice versa. Like I will have more conversations with her brother than she will have with her brother. And I become the source of information for family outings or stuff that involves that family faster than she will. I did want to throw Corey, our other co-host, under the bus.
Under the bus, yeah.
Because
me too.
he deals with family in-law factors. He, his dad, and his brother are all running the farm, and everybody's married. So there's a sister-in-law, and his wife is an in-law, and the perspective there, I'm going to give him a little bit of a jab for copping out on this, because it's a hard conversation. It's not going to be easy. And where I run into the most frustration with the in-laws side of my relationship is I'm professionally in the financial services industry. I have a lot of professional training that I could provide advice on, and that's a really tricky thing to turn over to an outlaw. We don't necessarily want to open up the books to somebody who's not blood, and it just gets locked down. But there's all other levels of expertise to where An in-law might be an agronomist by trade, but we're not going to let him pick the seed corn. Yeah, it all starts with a level of trust.
But Tanner, I first of all want you never to use that word again.
Outlaw?
Yeah. Dr. Baker wrote from Iowa State, wrote the foreword to the book, and he also used the term outlaw. And I want you to stop using that because it's a label that's not healthy and it's not helpful.
Do we have a whip sound on the podcast?
We should.
Okay, sorry. Keep going.
Cancel button.
I'm sorry, but language and words are very powerful. And I'm not a marriage counselor, but again, we talk about communication and using the words, you never do this and you always do this. Those two adjectives are also not helpful for solving solutions and making solutions in the relationship. But you talk about Corey and the in-laws, that's precisely where there may be room for a facilitated conversation, because as Lauren was speaking, I just wanted to shout out, different is not wrong. The way her parents do things because they were raised in Florida, or the way that Matthew's parents do things because they were raised in Iowa, different is not wrong. It's just different. And so can we please get rid of judgment? Can we please get rid of labels? Can we please get rid of bad behavior and accepting bad behavior? I have all of these pictures of in-laws in my head who I've spoken to and who come back to me years later and they say, Elaine, thank you for giving me my husband back, because the husband finally realized that the best thing for his marriage and relationship was to be in an enterprise separate from his brother. So breaking up into two enterprises was not failure, it was the best solution. And so don't prejudge the outcome of what you want. And Tanner, for your expertise as a banker, I would look at your in-laws and family and say, what are you waiting for? Why, and you mentioned also, well, they're blood, so they can't see the finances. Where was that written?
Right. I was hoping you'd say that.
You know, and so there's that phrase again from Susan Forward's book, emotional blackmail. Where is it written that we will do things the same way your parents or your in-laws done? And where is it written is a good way to suck up or bring up those unwritten family rules that you know are there, but nobody ever told you about them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you...
But if I'm hard-headed and I'm his dad, I'm going to say, it's none of your doggone business. I don't care if you know or not. I feel I've lived longer than you. I know more than you. And let me run it my way. So if the in-laws say that and they're hard-headed and they want to keep it there, what's Tanner's move? What's Lauren's move? What's my move? I have a hard-headed father-in-law too. And he's like, hey, it's none of your business. I don't even tell your mother-in-law how much we make. Literally, he's the only one that knows. And it might be his issue, but it's his farm. Where is it my position or our position to say that it's not my farm?
Dave, I'm just curious. I don't know what you call your father-in-law. I'm just curious, Charlie. That's a very interesting statement. I don't even tell your mother-in-law what's going on.
Uh-huh.
How's that working for you? And did you see the funeral announcement? Jake just had a heart attack last week. He's not here anymore. He's just left his whole family in chaos. Mm-hmm. Is that truly what you want for your beautiful, sweet daughter that I married? Is that truly what you want for your amazing, precious wife that you married? Why are you so stubborn? What are you truly afraid of, Charlie, that keeps you with all your financial cards close to your chest without any willingness to really let us as your business partners? We don't expect you to share with the rest of the sibling group what's going on financially, but we're your business partners. And newsflash, as you age in place on this lovely farm in Iowa, guess who's going to be taking care of you? It's us.
There you go, Tanner.
So let's work on working together, not working apart.
Bring up the nursing home and tell them, I know how much this costs, and this nursing home is going to be expensive. And do you want to die this way? Fun there.
Oh, man, you guys are so funny. Oh, man.
I want to add one piece of perspective that I've personally experienced. So early on in the conversation, talked about how I grew up 20-some years of my life with knowing farming as being done one way. But when I gave myself permission to allow them to tell me that I do it wrong, not because it meant I was wrong, but because there might have been a better way, or there might have been a way that I could modify what I'm doing to become better at a practice. It doesn't mean that there is a right or a wrong. So I appreciate, Elaine, that you brought that up, that it's okay to be different. And then I also was putting together an outline for an episode we've got coming down the pipeline for someone who's about to get married. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to try and come up with some marital tips. And I had remembered one that was given to me that it's okay to argue as long as your intent is to find a solution and not just to win. So I think that goes even further than just marriage advice. It comes into this conversation and back to our listener that it doesn't have to be wrong, but also if you feel strongly enough about your opinion or your practice, Lauren, would you agree that it's okay to argue your point as long as the intent is proper?
Yes. I mean, we go into several conversations where I'm going back to, I'd like a vacation. Yeah, I would love a vacation, but I know at the end of the day, I'm not taking this farmer off the farm for a week. I don't care how much I try, it's not going to happen because I'm compromising right now on things long term that I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. I'm no public speaker. I guess getting to the root of what we're trying to solve. I'm not trying to win a vacation. What am I really trying to do? I'm trying to spend more time with him. I'm trying to get him off farm work and us as a family doing something. So no, it's not going to look like bikinis in Cancun, but it may look like a weekend at a very local campsite. And I can look all I want on my close friends on social media and the trips that they're taking and the things that they get to do with their families. And I got to stop comparing myself to that. That's not the life that we live. And I knew that coming into it. But finding a happiness in our lifestyle that works for him and works for me. It's not going to look just like what I want, and it can't look like what he says that he can do. So it's finding that compromise, because many times we had this story when we did our webinar. My husband took the time off to go to the rodeo with me and my son. He left people in the field working, and he had extreme guilt, I'm sure, of that. But he knew it was important to me. So me recognizing him making that little change or sacrificing work for us, that put us back in a balance, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah.
I recognize that even those small things are a big thing for us on our farm, and appreciating that and enjoying that, knowing that the next day I may have to take my son by myself to go do something, or the next week we go to the fair without him. But I know that he's actively trying to make those things happen as much as he possibly can.
Tanner, I just came up with
one day we'll go to Cancun, I'm sure.
One day we'll go to Cancun. There you go. I like it. We got another book for Elaine, 7 Languages of Love. You've read that?
I've not read it. No.
Like where you realize your spouse is just needs,
my wife's read this.
Like if she needs time, or the guy's more about sex,
touch.
or more about appearance, or touch, or etc. We need 7 love languages of farmers, or seven factors of farmer. That's what I think we need. But because we even did that. My family gets together once a year, one time. And we go elk hunting and we're done. My wife's family gets together every birthday, every niece's graduation, something or other. And I'm like, well, I don't care about your niece. Like, I'm not saying that, but I mean, right. Like it was completely different worlds that we came from, and our families do it completely different. We just need a book to tell the 7 different types of farmers.
Doesn't make it wrong. Just makes it wrong. Different. So Elaine, last question I want to ask you, and then Lauren, one last question for you as we get ready to wrap up. I know we didn't get nearly as in depth as we wanted to, but that's the best part about giving contact information at the end of the show, is people can tailor the message to their own. So Elaine, your last question is, remind us what it means when you say strong families celebrate. And while she's answering that, Lauren, we ask every one of our guests, what is the best advice that you've ever been given? So you think about that. Elaine, Why is it important that strong families celebrate?
So Dr. Nikki Gerard, who's a psychologist from Saskatchewan, did a 12-year study of farm families on what makes them bounce back and be resilient to stress. And one of the three key things was strong families celebrate, they communicate well, and they are a part of a community. So celebration means small victories and wins. It means appreciating each other. It means paying attention to each other and being attentive to celebrating the good and not just dwelling on the bad. So strong families, Dave, your wife has a lot of birthday parties, but your family goes elk hunting. There's no judgment. There's different ways of celebrating togetherness, and that joy and that anticipation of being together and celebrating together helps build up what I call, and what Stephen Covey called, the emotional bank account. I also just wanted to say comparison is a joy stealer. So get off Instagram and pick up the phone and have a conversation with a true friend who can really hear the tonality of your voice.
I like that. I like that a lot. So Lauren, what is some of the best advice that you have ever been given? And then I will try to summarize. Okay. And Dave, you'll throw the challenge out.
Very good.
All right. Well, I guess mine would be, it's something about stop looking out and turn around and look into your own home. What that means to me is, in an age of social media, and I mean, Elaine touched on this, the very last thing that she said, you can compare yourself to everybody else and it will constantly make you feel like a failure. If you compare yourself to your neighbor's farm, where their house is a lot prettier than yours and their farm is a lot cleaner than yours and they have more cattle, and you see that new piece of machinery that they bought and, oh, well, they just went on a trip too. Like, stop looking at other people's and turn around and focus on yourself, because that's the only way, in my opinion, that you're going to be happy, is when you focus on the relationship with your husband. It's not going to look like your best friend in the whole world that you've been friends with since kindergarten. Their relationship looks different than yours. You have no idea what's going on underneath. And stop looking at social media, because it's not all real life. Most of it's not real life. And that's something I had to learn the hard way the first 2 or 3 years that we got married. I was comparing myself to a lot of young families, and our story just looks different. And the best thing I can do is work on my own personal family and stop comparing it to other people's.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And that it's hard to do because there's reality TV all around us, all the social media platforms. It's drilled in our head to watch what other people are doing in life when you just need to focus inward. So I'll do my best job.
Hold on. Our listeners, Tanner, said they wanted actual answers and not just us talking around scenarios. We did a whole lot of talking around scenarios. So now when you give the summary,
now the pressure's on me.
The pressure is on you. You better give some tips that we actually pulled out of this. You can't. I got a couple in case you fail.
Listen to this. Oh, there's no failure here. We'll get this put together. So we were here talking about the in-law factor today. And the in-law factor is simply the relationship and the differences that you have in a farming operation. And it could be any business, Dave, but in a farming operation that is based around how decisions are made and how customs have been handled, how relationships have been handled before the marriage, and how that's going to look continued when you combine different cultures. You do not have because you do not ask. So the first tip that I have, Dave, for our listeners is you have to ask. Be polite, be respectful. Cajun said the same thing. Put it in a letter, because a letter can be both emotional and non-emotional all at the same time. It gives the person you're delivering the letter to time to reflect on what you're asking. You can then address the letter. They have time to form their thoughts. So you do not have because you do not ask. So the first piece of advice, Dave, is you got to ask for it. Mm-hmm. And you have to ask for it in a polite, respectable way, and that can be a letter as one of the options. What you believe to be true, how you behave with each other, and the decisions that you make are keys in understanding why things are happening the way they are. So the second thing you need to do that we can give actionable advice on is understand what is true. What do you and your spouse as one unit believe to be true? Secondly, how do you interact with each other and how do you interact with those family members? Because you can control your interactions and then you have the ability to have the conversations around how decisions are made. Husband and wife must be one unit. So there's a third one. If you're not on the same page with your spouse, that's where you start. Assumption-free farming will be the best gift that you can get. So if you assume your husband is farming one way or you assume your wife is farming one way, you need to get that figured out, and hiring a facilitator for those discussions to get rid of the assumptions could be a really key thing for you. It's okay to do it differently. That doesn't make it wrong. I'm just curious is a actionable phrase that might allow you to break a tough conversation wide open.
Or help me understand.
Or what are you afraid of are good phrases to use. Work on, if you do get into a conflict, working to have that argument or that discussion to a resolution, not just to be the winner. So that's what I've got, a couple of action items there in summary for how we can approach the in-law factor and make our farm run smoother. What do you got for a challenge, Dave?
I got just 2 adds to what you had there. It's okay to be different. You might have said that. Don't compare yourself is an actionable task. It's
Yes.
something to look inside yourself. Our guests had a webinar. Both of them had a webinar. There's an actionable task. I haven't listened to the webinar yet, but hey, now that I know it's out there, listeners, you might have been like me and rock over your world too. Hey, there's a webinar out there. Elaine, tell me how we find this webinar real quick.
Just go to farmfamilycoach.com, head for the shop, and it's all there.
Okay, and then she's got a book that has eggshells on it. I don't know if it's called Walking on Eggshells, but that's what I'm going to call it. It's called Farming In-Laws Factor. There's a book out there, Tanner. Somebody already wrote a book on this. So there's 2 more actionable things that you can do. If you're a listener and you actually wanted to do something, don't call us out on that because we're just calling you out on buying this book. Now, here is what you have to do as the challenge. Not buy the book. Here's the challenge. Tanner, you said it, and I've never heard it this way. You said that the marriage, somebody that talked to you, said it's okay to argue as long as the argument is going for a common goal, not to win. I have never heard that before. Here is my challenge. Open conversation. We talk communication is everything. You gave us 5 ways to open a conversation there. So my challenge is to open a conversation, but I'm going to be guilty of this. Don't just open a conversation to win. Open that conversation and maybe even start that sentence rather than help me understand or I would like to have a conversation. Maybe write the letter and make the letter title say, I would like our common goal to be. Maybe that's how we open it. I've never heard that before, that it's okay to argue. We're not having arguments. We're having discussions with the other people, with in-laws. Right. But we need the common goal. They need to know it's a shared goal. That's the challenge.
I do. I like that a lot. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure. We have had a great time here, and we all know that we'll put it in the show notes to where we can get everybody connected to you. This won't be the last time that we talk. Lauren, it was a pleasure getting to meet you. Thank you for joining us, and good luck on your mission to help families like this continue to build stronger family farms.
Tanner, Elaine just showed us her shirt, and it said, find harmony in something. Elaine, you got to say something so I can see it.
It says, find harmony through understanding. That's my mission.
And you can find harmony, listeners, through listening to the Farm for Profit podcast is my plug for the day. Thanks for listening.
Yes. Thanks again, ladies. Lauren, it's been a pleasure. Elaine as well. And listeners, until next time, have a good one.
Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long.